Picture your morning routine. You wake up, possibly after an alarm has done the work of pulling you out of sleep, rather than any natural signal from your environment. You move to a kitchen where food was delivered or purchased rather than hunted or grown. You sit for a while. You travel somewhere sitting down. You spend hours in a chair. You travel back sitting down. You sit some more. You go to sleep in a temperature-controlled environment with a mattress engineered to minimize the physical inconvenience of lying down. At no point in this entire day did your body do anything remotely close to what human bodies were doing for the overwhelming majority of human history. No carrying of heavy loads for kilometers across uneven terrain. No manual processing of raw materials with hand tools for hours at a stretch. No construction of shelter with your hands. No long periods of walking that researchers now classify as the primary human locomotor mode for most of our species' existence. The most physically demanding thing many modern people do on a given Tuesday is carry groceries from the car to the front door, and even that is increasingly optional. So here's the question that follows naturally from this observation. Are we getting weaker? Not as a metaphor for cultural softness or generational decline in the editorializing sense that tends to generate arguments online. In the strict, measurable, biomechanical, skeletal, physiological sense. Are human bodies in the modern world weaker than human bodies in the past? And if so, how much weaker, in what ways, over what timescale, and does it actually matter? The answer, when you look at what the science actually shows rather than what intuition suggests, turns out to be considerably more specific, more surprising, and more interesting than either the "yes, we are soft now" or "no, this is a myth" camps tend to acknowledge. Here is what is happening. Start with the most direct evidence because this is a question that deserves data rather than assertion. Grip strength is one of the most studied measures of physical performance across populations and time periods, partly because it is easy to measure with a dynamometer, partly because it correlates with whole body muscular strength, and partly because researchers have been measuring it long enough to have data spanning decades. The grip strength data for modern populations in developed countries is, depending on how you look at it, either slightly concerning or dramatically concerning. A 2016 study published in the Journal of Hand Surgery measured grip strength in American adults and compared the results to a 1985 study using similar methodology. The findings showed that grip strength had declined significantly across all age groups and both sexes over those 30 years, with male grip strength showing declines of around 15 to 20% across multiple age categories. The men aged 20 to 34 in 2016 had weaker grips than men of the same age in 1985. Not weaker than ancient humans, weaker than their own parents and grandparents at the same age. This is a 30-year decline in a single country, across a period during which fitness culture was if anything more mainstream and more accessible than it had previously been. The gyms existed, the protein supplements existed, the information about training existed, and grip strength still fell measurably. Grip strength matters beyond the specific capacity to grip things. It is one of the strongest predictors of overall mortality in epidemiological research. Lower grip strength is associated with higher all-cause mortality, higher cardiovascular disease risk, longer hospital stays after surgery, and worse outcomes across a range of health conditions. The grip dynamometer is measuring something that indexes the overall condition of the body's musculoskeletal and cardiovascular systems in ways that make it a surprisingly powerful health marker. When grip strength declines across a population, something beyond just hand strength is changing. The bone density story is perhaps even more informative than the grip strength data because bone responds to mechanical loading across a lifetime, and therefore encodes physical activity history in a way that is readable in skeletal remains. This allows comparison not just across decades of modern populations, but across centuries and millennia of human history. Studies comparing the bone density and cross-sectional geometry of modern human femora, thigh bones, with historical populations from the same geographic regions consistently find that modern humans have substantially reduced bone density and reduced cortical bone thickness compared to pre-industrial populations. Comparisons with agricultural populations from medieval Europe, with Bronze Age populations, with Neolithic farmers, and with Mesolithic and Paleolithic hunter-gatherers show a progressive reduction in bone robusticity moving towards the present. The magnitude of the difference is not trivial. Some studies of tibial cross-sectional geometry, a measure of bone structural strength, find that modern humans have bone structural properties 10 to 20% below those of pre-industrial agricultural populations, and substantially further below the values seen in hunter-gatherer skeletal samples. The bones of modern humans are, by these structural measures, less strong than the bones of people doing pre-industrial agricultural labor, who were in turn less strong than the bones of hunter-gatherers whose daily activity involved sustained sustained physical demand across their entire lives. Bone remodels in response to mechanical loading. More loading, particularly in youth when bone is most responsive, produces denser, structurally stronger bone. Less loading produces structurally weaker bone. The bone density trajectory across human history, declining from the extreme robusticity of Paleolithic hunter-gatherers through agricultural populations to modern sedentary populations, is essentially a reading of declining habitual physical demand written in skeletal architecture. This is not purely a genetic story. The genetic baseline for bone robusticity in modern humans may be lower than in ancestral populations. This will be discussed, but the bone density differences observed are too large and too consistent to be explained by genetics alone. Environmental factors, primarily activity level during growth and across adulthood, are driving much of the observable decline in bone structural properties. Cardiovascular fitness data adds another dimension. VO2 max, the maximum rate at which the body can consume oxygen during intense exercise, considered the gold standard measure of aerobic fitness, has declined in multiple large population studies across the last several decades, particularly in children and young adults. Studies tracking cardiovascular fitness in large cohorts in Europe and North America show reductions in average VO2 max of several percent per decade in some groups. The decline in children is particularly noteworthy because it represents a change occurring during the developmental period when aerobic capacity is most responsive to training and when habitual activity patterns have the most lasting effect on physiological capacity. A child who is less aerobically active during development will have lower aerobic capacity as an adult, independently of whatever they do in adult life. The activity deficits of modern childhood are not simply recoverable by taking up exercise as an adult. Some of the developmental window is closed. Comparative studies of children in countries with different activity cultures find substantial differences in cardiovascular fitness that correlate with habitual activity patterns rather than with genetic background. Children in countries where walking to school, outdoor play, and physical activity are still common show higher aerobic fitness than children in more sedentary environments with equivalent or even superior genetic fitness potential. Now pull back from the modern decline data and go further back in time, because the comparison across generations is interesting, but the comparison across evolutionary time is revelatory. The skeletal record of human physical capacity, traced back through the last few 100,000 years of the genus Homo, shows a long-term trend of declining robusticity that predates industrialization by tens of thousands of years. Upper Paleolithic modern humans, the people who arrived in Europe roughly 45,000 years ago, were substantially more robust than modern humans in bone density, cortical thickness, and muscle attachment development. They were not as robust as Neanderthals, but they were dramatically more robust than modern humans in ways that reflect the habitual physical demands of hunter-gatherer life. The transition to agriculture, which occurred between approximately 10,000 and 3,000 years ago in different world regions, produced a measurable decline in human physical robusticity that is visible in the skeletal record across every region where the transition has been studied. Neolithic agricultural populations were, on average, shorter and less skeletally robust than the Mesolithic hunter-gatherer populations they replaced or displaced. The agricultural diet, lower in protein density than the hunter-gatherer diet, combined with different activity patterns, produced changes in physical development that are readable in bone. This pre-industrial decline is not the same phenomenon as the modern decline, though they are related. The Neolithic decline was partly nutritional. Lower protein availability from grain-dominated diets impaired growth and skeletal development, and partly activity-based as agricultural labor, while physically demanding, involved different mechanical loading patterns than the varied high-intensity demands of hunter-gatherer subsistence. The modern decline is overwhelmingly activity-based, occurring against a background of unprecedented nutritional abundance. Modern humans in developed countries are not getting shorter due to protein deficiency. They are getting less dense in bone, less strong in grip, and less aerobically fit while consuming more protein than any previous human population. The decoupling of nutritional abundance from physical development is one of the most unprecedented features of modern human biology. What is happening at the level of the genome adds another layer. Ancient DNA analysis allows researchers to examine genetic variants associated with physical traits in ancient populations and compare their frequencies to modern populations. Studies examining genetic variants associated associated with bone density, muscle fiber composition, and physical performance traits, find some evidence of declining frequency of performance-enhancing variants in modern compared to ancient populations, suggesting that natural selection has been relaxing on physical performance traits as physical performance has become less critical for survival and reproduction. This is evolution responding to a changed environment. When physical strength and endurance are required for survival and reproduction, individuals with higher genetic potential for these traits have better outcomes and leave more descendants. When survival and reproduction decouple from physical capacity, when a sedentary person survives and reproduces just as well as a physically capable person, or in modern resource environments, potentially better, selection pressure on physical performance traits relaxes. Neutral or mildly disadvantageous variants accumulate in the gene pool. The genetic baseline shifts. How much this genetic shift has contributed to declining physical capacity relative to environmental factors like activity level and nutrition is an active research question. The consensus is that environmental factors dominate over the recent timescales where the declines are most documented. 30-year or 100-year trends in human strength and fitness are too rapid to be explained primarily by genetic change, which operates on much longer timescales. But over the longer evolutionary timescale of thousands of years since the Neolithic transition, genetic relaxation of selection on physical performance may be contributing to a lower baseline from which environmental inputs work. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content, covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. The muscle fiber composition story is particularly interesting for understanding what type of strength and physical capacity is changing. Human skeletal muscle contains two primary fiber types: slow twitch fibers, type 1, that are fatigue resistant and support sustained, moderate intensity activity, and fast twitch fibers, type 2, that generate high force and power but fatigue rapidly. The ratio of fiber types in any individual's muscles is partly genetically determined and partly responsive to training patterns. Modern humans in sedentary environments, particularly those doing no resistance training, show progressive loss of type 2 muscle fiber mass and relative predominance of type 1 fibers. This is not simply a decline in muscle mass generally, it is a specific shift in muscle architecture toward the endurance profile and away from the power profile, driven by the absence of the high-force, short-duration activity patterns that maintain type 2 fiber mass. Ancient and historical, humans whose activity patterns involved high-force tasks, lifting, carrying, throwing, wrestling, tool use, would have maintained higher type 2 fiber proportions throughout their lives. Modern populations in sedentary occupations progressively lose type 2 fiber mass from young adulthood onward, a process that accelerates with age and that is partially but not fully reversible with resistance training later in life. The window during which type 2 fiber development is most responsive to training is developmental, childhood, and adolescence. And modern children in sedentary environments are not providing their muscles with the stimulation that maximally develops this fiber type. The immune system provides an unexpected angle on the human weakening question that extends beyond musculoskeletal considerations. The dramatic reduction in microbial diversity encountered by modern humans in sanitized environments, the reduction in parasitic burden, and the altered microbiome associated with modern diets and antibiotic exposure have produced immune systems that are quantifiably different from those of historical populations. Whether weaker is the right word for modern immune function is debated. Modern humans are less immunologically prepared for certain pathogenic challenges and more prone to inflammatory and autoimmune conditions than historical populations. But the immune system is unambiguously operating in a different mode. This immune system shift is related to the hygiene hypothesis, now more accurately called the Old Friends hypothesis, which proposes that the human immune system co-evolved with a specific suite of microbial and parasitic exposures across hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary history, and that the dramatic reduction in these exposures in modern environments has disrupted immune regulation in ways that manifest as increasing rates of allergy, asthma, autoimmune disease, and inflammatory conditions. Modern humans are not immunologically weaker in the sense of being less capable against against the pathogens we evolved with. We are more vulnerable to the diseases of immune dysregulation, the conditions that arise when an immune system built for a world of continuous microbial challenge is deployed in a world of unprecedented microbial scarcity. The rates of asthma, allergic disease, inflammatory bowel disease, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, and other autoimmune and inflammatory conditions have increased dramatically in developed countries over the last century, and epidemiological and experimental evidence increasingly points toward the altered immune environment of modern life as a contributing factor. The cognitive performance angle is where the weakening narrative becomes most contested and most nuanced. The Flynn effect, the well-documented rise in average IQ scores across much of the 20th century in many countries, might suggest that humans are getting cognitively stronger in certain measurable dimensions, complicating any simple getting weaker overall narrative. Average IQ scores rose substantially across the 20th century in multiple countries, a trend attributed to better nutrition, better education, and reduced exposure to toxins like lead rather than to genetic change. But the Flynn effect has reversed or stalled in several Scandinavian and other developed countries since approximately the 1990s, a phenomenon researchers are actively trying to understand. Whether this represents a genuine ceiling effect, a change in the types of cognitive demands people regularly engage with, or something else is not yet clear. But the reversal of the Flynn effect in countries where it was most clearly established is suggestive that the cognitive trajectory is more complex than a simple upward trend. Specific cognitive capacities relevant to physical world engagement, spatial reasoning, mechanical reasoning, certain types of working memory used in manual tasks may be declining in populations where these capacities are less exercised. The analogy to muscle fiber composition is instructive. Cognitive capacities that are not regularly challenged degrade in ways that capacities that are challenged do not, and the specific pattern of cognitive challenge that modern environments provide is radically different from what evolutionary history built the human brain to handle. The sensory system provides perhaps the most concrete, everyday example of use-dependent capacity decline. Human myopia, nearsightedness, has increased dramatically across the last several decades, particularly in East Asian populations where rates have reached extraordinarily high levels, with some studies finding near-universal myopia in young urban adults. The primary driver of this epidemic of myopia is not genetic change. The genetic architecture of myopia hasn't shifted that rapidly. It is reduced outdoor light exposure during developmental years, particularly the high-intensity light of outdoor environments that is critical for normal eye development. Children who spend insufficient time outdoors during the developmental period, critical for eye growth, develop myopia at dramatically higher rates than children with more outdoor exposure, independent of the amount of near work they do. The human eye, adapted over evolutionary time to develop normally in environments with substantial outdoor light exposure, develops abnormally in indoor environments with artificial lighting. Modern visual environments are producing myopia at epidemic rates because they don't provide the developmental inputs the eye system was built to receive. This is the general pattern across most of the human weakening evidence. Not a catastrophic or irreversible collapse, but a predictable consequence of deploying biological systems evolved for one type of environment in a radically different type of environment. Muscles that evolved to be challenged by load become weaker when not loaded. Bones that evolved to be stimulated by impact become less dense when impact is absent. Immune systems that evolved to be calibrated by microbial challenge become dysregulated when microbial challenge disappears. Eyes that evolved to develop in outdoor light develop abnormally in indoor light. The human body is responsive to its environment in ways that evolutionary biology predicts and that the evidence confirms. It is not a fixed performance level that degrades independently of how it is used. It builds and maintains capacity in response to demands placed on it, and reduces that capacity when demands are absent. This is not a flaw in design. It is an energy efficiency feature. Maintaining biological capacity is metabolically expensive. Building capacity only where and when it is demanded is more efficient than maintaining maximum capacity everywhere regardless of use. The problem is that modern environments have removed most of the demands that shaped the species. The loading is gone. The microbial exposures are gone. The outdoor light is reduced. The varied physical demands are replaced by sedentary specialization. The body, responding rationally to the absence of demands, does not maintain the capacities those demands would have built. Are humans getting weaker? Yes, measurably, across multiple physical domains, on timescales spanning decades and centuries and millennia. The grip strength is declining. The bone density is declining. The aerobic fitness data is declining. The muscle architecture is shifting. The immune regulation is changing. The eyes are developing abnormally at epidemic rates. Is this irreversible? At the individual level, mostly not. Physical capacity responds to physical demand with remarkable plasticity throughout much of the human lifespan. The body can rebuild much of what disuse has reduced, given the right inputs. The 30-year-old who has been sedentary since childhood cannot fully recover what they would have been had they grown up differently, but they can recover substantially more than most people in that situation believe is possible. At the population level, the trajectory depends on whether the environments humans create continue to remove the demands that maintained biological capacity across evolutionary history, or whether future understanding of what those demands were and what they produced leads to deliberate choices to recreate them even in the absence of survival necessity. The morning routine at the beginning of this account is efficient. It is comfortable. It is, by many metrics, an enormous improvement on the morning routines of human history, most of which involved considerably more discomfort and considerably higher risk of dying. But the body that walks through that morning routine was built for something else. And the gap between what it was built for and what it is actually asked to do is showing up measurably in the data. The question is what to do about it. And the answer starts with understanding what the data actually shows rather than arguing about whether the question is fair to ask.